Chapter 16. Practices of Epigenetic Medicine. As human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world as in being able to remake ourselves. Mahatma Gandhi. Epigenetics bear promise far beyond our current field of vision. The journal Science defined epigenetics as the study of heritable changes in gene function that occur without a change in the DNA sequence. That's a good definition of epigenetics as applied to the transmission of information across generations, once seen as the primary function of genes, but it misses the potential of the positive genetic shifts that we can create right now in our own bodies by deliberately making changes in our consciousness that have epigenetic effects. As I have read the research in this field, it has challenged me in my own life and behavior. There are days when I feel accountably grouchy, and I know that if I spread my misery into the world around me, I become an agent of negative epigenetic change, activating stress genes in people around me. So I make a conscious choice to say and do certain things. I may say an affirmation and do an EFT routine. I might meditate for a few minutes, enter a state of heart coherence, or say a prayer. I might take a 10-minute nap. I might force myself to say a kind thing to another shopper in line at the grocery store. I might visualize my work life a year in the future and see myself looking back on the solutions that I found to the problems that so vex me today. These are all deliberate, conscious interventions. My grocery store conversation engages the healing power of altruism. My nap gets my feelings back in sync with my clock genes. An affirmation neutralizes harmful beliefs. EFT balances the electromagnetic field of my body. Saying positive words reminds me that I can cultivate the habit of kindness. My visualization reduces my stress, reminding me that this too shall pass. Each of these things requires only a few minutes, yet taken together, they can turn a bad day into a good day and give me my experience of peace of mind and health of body. Knowing the power of epigenetic control makes one much less casual about words, thoughts, and actions. Gene splicing seeks beneficial effects by manipulating the composition of genes in the laboratory. Imagine a medicine of the future where the laboratory in which your genes are being modified is your own mind, moment by moment with every thought and every action you undertake. Imagine a virtuous cycle in which heart-focused intentions sends an epigenetic signal deactivating your fight-or-flight mechanism. That improves your mood, which reinforces the strength of your heart-focused intention, which sends a signal to build cell repair hormones like DHEA. Where does the cycle stop? No one knows. The human health span? Health span equals healthy lifespan. Using only the factors known today and not the fruits of future research might extend to 140 years. This figure seems completely outside the bounds of possibility to most medical practitioners today. Perhaps as impossible as proposing to a Utah frontier surgeon in 1900 that within a century human life expectancy would almost double from the 42-year average that prevailed at that time. The idea that our DNA can be triggered by our own feelings, thoughts, and intentions acting in our energy fields might be as axiomatic to the next generation of treatment professionals as today's understanding that aspirin thins the blood. As this idea is researched and developed, an entirely new medicine might take shape. This medicine might look completely different from today's medicine, weaving together complementary and alternative medicine with advances in technological medicine. It will shift personal and social well-being to an extent we can barely imagine today. Recently, J. Olhansky, Ph.D., professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of Illinois at Chicago, debunked the idea that human life expectancy might increase significantly in the years to come. In the New York Times article that holds that the era of large increases in life expectancy may be nearing an end, he asserts that there are no lifestyle changes, surgical procedures, vitamins, antioxidants, hormones, or techniques of genetic engineering available today with the capacity to repeat the gains in life expectancy that were achieved in the 20th century. I can see how he would reach that conclusion working from his list. But missing from that list is energy medicine, consciousness-based therapies, spirituality, and all the other methods in this book. So when you factor these into the equation, you get a much more encouraging result. A typical medical visit today goes something like this. A patient makes an appointment, driven to the practitioner by some ailment or complaint. The doctor listens, asks questions, performs an examination, gives advice, and writes a prescription for that ailment. If the ailment does not go away, or if it disappears but resurfaces in some other form, then further steps may be taken. Tests may be performed, surgery or more powerful drugs may be prescribed. An escalation of treatment occurs until the patient responds. The first doctor visit is relatively quick and cheap. By the time treatment escalates, for instance into chemotherapy and radiation for cancer, or hip replacement for degenerative bone disease, the solutions are neither quick nor cheap, and they may have severe consequences for the quality of life of the patient. This is backloaded treatment, with few of the costs on the front end of the treatment cycle, and a very high total cost in terms of both dollars and quality of life. An integrative medical approach is quite different. There are more cost and more attention on the front end. During the first visit, attention is given to all aspects of the patient to see how the presenting condition fits into the larger picture. Those larger picture issues are then addressed. If the patient's lifestyle can be shifted, perhaps given nudges by a number of different healing modalities, then many of the medical problems that characterize poor ongoing lifestyle choices may be avoided. The diabetic, for instance, who embraces a low glycemic diet plus an exercise program may eliminate the need for later costly and devastating interventions like the amputation of gangrenous limbs. The attention and cost of appropriate holistic intervention result in a much higher quality of life for the patient, and much lower costs over the whole treatment cycle. Every dollar that a company invests in wellness and prevention programs saves $3 in later disease care costs. And here is what such a treatment plan might look like. Number 1. Start treatment with energy medicine. Energy medicine functions at the high level of general wellness. It is non-specific, tuning up every cell, organ, and system of organs. As such, it is the place to start treatment, not a place to go once the remedies offered by allopathic medicine have been exhausted, as so many patients do. Energy systems underlie cellular architecture, and they are the first place to start building a foundation for vibrant health. If you have a serious or life-threatening medical condition, conventional treatment might be the perfect solution. When you've been hit with a poisoned arrow, advised the Buddha, take the arrow out before you have a metaphysical discussion. The American College of Emergency Physicians offers the following guidelines for recognizing a medical emergency that requires immediate care: difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, chest pain or pressure lasting 2 minutes or more, fainting, sudden dizziness or weakness, changes in your vision, confusion or disorientation, any sudden or severe pain, uncontrolled bleeding, severe or persistent vomiting or diarrhea, coughing up or vomiting blood, suicidal or homicidal feelings. But most visits to hospitals are not for any of these conditions. In 90% of instances, no identifiable organic ailment can be found. Deciding what constitutes a condition that requires treatment and for which conditions treatment can be deferred for a time requires information and self-awareness. Early treatment for certain conditions, such as prostatic cancer, makes little difference to the outcome. Low back pain is another common condition for which a variety of safe treatments based on exercise and consciousness are available. It is pervasive, some 65 million Americans, affecting nearly 80% of the adult population at some time during their life. It represents the single most common cause for disability in persons under the age of 45. Studies show that the practice of hatha yoga by back pain sufferers can reduce pain intensity, reliance on pain medication, and disability. Yoga has been shown to reduce the stress level of cancer patients, ease insomnia, and improve emotional well-being. And the book EFT for Back Pain is full of examples of sufferers who've quickly overcome back pain by addressing the underlying emotional issues. These are the first places to start when dealing with low back pain, rather than jumping on drugs, which may mask the symptoms without addressing the causes. The medical encounter of the future might start with a prayer as certainly as the medical encounter of today starts with a clipboard and a white coat. It might involve energy psychology, meditation training, or another epigenetic intervention. Only once safe and non-invasive techniques have been exhausted would risky and dangerous medical interventions be considered. Number 2. Attachment doctoring. Without some extra effort, we simply cannot relate effectively to other human beings at the fast pace of modern life. For the gifts of deep human connection to appear, we have to set aside our busy lives and slow down, at least for a time, in order to engage in the meaningful relationships that Will and Dossie advocate. Andrea Bialik, MD, whose business card says holistic gynecologist, and who specializes in menopause, has a busy practice assisting women looking for alternatives to hormone replacement therapy. She says a woman will say she has no sex drive, and I may suggest she and her husband go to a bed and breakfast and see what happens when they're happy, healthy, and relaxed. That lovemaking improves on vacation is a truism among marriage and family therapists. When a couple has no agenda for 2 or 3 days, no telephones, obligations, or children to deal with, and each person slows down to a pace where they can listen carefully and speak meaningfully, then gradually match the pace of their mate, a new level of healing becomes possible. Most medical settings today allow the doctor very limited time with the patient. In the wise words of the authors of A General Theory of Love, medicine lost sight of this truth. Attachment is psychology. Good physicians have always known that the relationship heals. Indeed, good doctors existed before any modern therapeutic instruments did. Western medicine embraced the effective machines and seeded its historic soul. Establishing a relationship and setting a human pace for the healing encounter reclaims this historic soul. Matching our pace to that of another, especially when we're living fast-paced lives, can take some effort. It is one of the jobs of a parent to notice the pace at which a child comprehends and match that pace. This is one of the disciplines that can make child rearing a joy for busy people. It forces them to downshift to second or first gear. It requires paying primary attention to the physical connection with the person you're with, and is part of what parental psychologists call attachment parenting. The same is true for the healing encounter. The client in front of the doctor doesn't want to rattle off a list of symptoms for evaluation, and is not assessing the doctor by how fast she comes up with a prescriptive solution. The client is suffering and needs understanding and empathy. Tuning in to people in order to understand their afflictions cannot be done at the same pace as drag racing. This attachment doctoring is one that establishes relationship first. Alternative medicine is good at this. Again, from a general theory of love, the alternative healers proliferated in response to the demand for a context of relatedness. These limbically wiser settings are friendlier to emotional needs. They involve regular contact with someone who participates in close listening, and often the ancient reassurance of laying on hands. Alternative medicine sees these activities as quintessential rather than incidental to healing. A paper recently published by Johns Hopkins University researcher Bruce Barrett summed up a survey of the remarkable internal pharmacy we have at our disposal, with the following 8 recommendations that caregivers use to engage it. Speak positively about treatments, provide encouragement, develop trust, provide reassurance, support relationships, respect uniqueness, explore values, and create ceremony. These clinical actions can empower patients to seek greater health and may provide a healthful sense of being cared for. The healing encounter of the future will be done at the pace of the integrative medical clinic's navigator, a wise and compassionate ear who can hear the patient's state of being and steer him or her in an appropriate direction, not at the pace of the HMO physician who might have just 12 minutes per patient. The actual therapy session might be quick. I'm happy going to a naturopath who listens to my symptoms and writes a prescription, and with a chiropractor who lays me on the table and makes 4 adjustments in as many minutes. But the initial encounter has to be conducted at a pace that allows the evaluator to tune into the patient deeply and notice what's happening on every level with that person. Number 3, sealed interventions. In a sealed application of treatments, the most benevolent and least invasive therapies is used first. This approach supposes an escalation of interventions, using the simplest ones as the first line of treatment, and employing more drastic means only if the previous treatment is not effective, and using technological medicine only when and if it becomes absolutely necessary. If a patient learns to meditate, begins an adequate exercise program, makes appropriate dietary shifts, many illnesses take care of themselves. Norman Shealy lists a number of conditions in his book where innocuous, small-scale changes can reverse the course of diseases that are difficult, costly, and life-disruptive to treat with conventional means. In the late 1970s, I was acquainted with an eccentric old doctor, Henry Wasserman, a professor at New York University, whose area of interest was medical ethics. He was horrified at what he discovered in his profession. The most passionate thing he ever said to me, in his raspy, cynical, Yiddish-accented voice, was, "I have learned enough in this job to give you one piece of solid advice. Never go near a hospital unless you are near the point of death." Though he may have had a jaundiced view of doctoring, it's clear that all of us have huge leverage available to us through the power of our awareness, and that consciousness is the first place to go for healing. Mark Makazi, MD, PhD, co-editor of the anthology Consciousness and Healing, refers to a continuum of approaches from the most invasive to the least invasive. A continuum approach is also used by the National Pain Foundation. They advise patients to use a pain treatment continuum. This is a step-by-step plan for the logical use of pain treatments that suggest using less invasive, less costly therapies before resorting to more invasive and more costly therapies. They strongly advise relaxation, psychological awareness, and healing behaviors before resorting to more invasive therapies. The plan suggests either using one therapy or more than one therapy at a time, abandoning those that do not work, and advancing to more invasive therapies, as in climbing a ladder. It starts with exercise, progresses through psychotherapy and over-the-counter medication, and then, when all else fails, end with highly invasive interventions such as anesthetic nerve blocks, epidural steroid injections, implanted catheters, neurodestructive techniques, spinal cord stimulators, and morphine pumps. An example of a non-invasive, quick, and cheap intervention for anxiety is a self-administered 30-second EFT routine. It involves absolutely no risk, yet it holds the potential to produce big shifts. If the problem does not shift after small-scale interventions, it might be necessary to scale up. That might mean enrolling in a class, taking a retreat, training in a specific technique, or trying several different energy therapies in quick succession to see if one of them brings relief. Finally, if all else fails, it might be necessary to scale up to an anxiety-reducing drug. But strong interventions like this should be the last resort and not the first. Hippocrates advised us, first, do no harm, and that it is a good first principle to start with in designing a step-by-step plan to address our healing issues. Number 4, thrive through chaos. People often have elaborate sets of reasons as to why they cannot be well. Brad Blanton, PhD, a psychotherapist who wrote Radical Honesty, How to Transform Your Life by Telling the Truth, and a number of other books, calls these our tragic stories. He explains how we get wrapped up in them and neglect the very things that are healthy and serving us in our lives right now. Tragic stories prevent us from seeking our full potential, let alone realizing it. In The Beethoven Factor, Paul Pershaw, Ph.D., talks about how many great works of art, literature, and science have been produced despite the chaos in the personal lives of their creators. Although he cites dozens of examples, he picks Beethoven as the archetypal creator of beauty amongst personal tragedy. Forsaking the traditional label of survivors, he calls these people thrivers, people who don't just make do, but go on to extraordinary accomplishment, despite psychological, spiritual, and physical setbacks. Tragic stories that any of them might have used as a valid excuse to give up hope and accept a limited life. In a condensation of the Beethoven factor that Dr. Pershaw prepared for The Heart of Healing, in a section entitled A Thriver's Hall of Fame, he assembled the following partial list of thrivers, some of them world famous and others obscure. Lance Armstrong. He thrived through cancer to achieve unprecedented success in bike racing and to inspire other cancer patients. William Carlos Williams. He suffered a severe stroke and subsequent emotional breakdown, only to later write great poetry and win the Pulitzer Prize for his work, Pictures from Brugesbell. Nelson Mandela. He emerged from years of imprisonment and torture to become a leader for freedom, democracy, and the rights of the oppressed. Pierre-Auguste Renard. Unable to walk and with fingers twisted by arthritis, he attached a paintbrush to his hand and painted some of the world's most memorable works, including, at age 76, The Washerwoman. Henri Matisse. Suffering from heart failure, gastrointestinal disease, and with his lungs failing, he placed paintbrushes on a long stick and painted from his bed. His style created an entirely new field with a unique combination of color and form. Enrico Dandolo. While serving as a peace ambassador to Constantinople in 1172 CE, he was blinded in both eyes by the emperor's guards. 29 years later, and at 94, he led Venice to victory over Constantinople, and at age 97 was appointed chief magistrate of Constantinople. Sister Gertrude Morgan. She devoted her entire life to establishing and running an orphanage in New Orleans named Gentilly. When she was 65 years old, a hurricane destroyed her orphanage. She then returned to her interest in painting and went on to have her works displayed in museums around the world. Ding Ling, a pseudonym used by the Chinese novelist and radical feminist Qian Bingzai. She was imprisoned from the age of 67 to 71 during the Cultural Revolution of the 1970s in China. Upon her release, she went on to write some of her most highly prized works. She wrote an inspiring novel describing her experience of banishment to China's northern wilderness. Helen Keller, blind, deaf, and mute from age 19 months, she wrote and published at age 75 her book, Teacher, in honor of the woman who helped her thrive through her suffering. Jessie J Aaron, a descendant of slaves with a Seminole Indian grandmother, he too worked as a slave. Throughout his life he cared for his disabled wife and had to spend all of his meager funds on surgery to save his wife's sight. In poverty, he offered a definition of what I'm calling the Beethoven factor. He wrote, "It was then that the Spirit woke me up and said, 'Carve wood.'" He went on to become one of the most respected wood sculptors in the world. The new model of wellness focuses on what's working in patients' lives and what their potentials are, as well as treating the issues that trouble them. But the places of wellness will be the starting point, not the end point. I had a mentor, Bill Bayhan, D.C. When I was taking my first classes in energy medicine in my late teens, one of his favorite sayings was, "What's right with you is the point. What's wrong with you is beside the point." Our lives are often messy, ambiguous, perplexing, and incomplete. Yet the doctor of the future will see in every patient, in whatever state, the presence of the dimension of wholeness. That archetype becomes the starting point for every treatment, for every step on the journey of recovery, regardless of whether the body and ego survive. Even if they do survive, it's just for a limited season, for eventually every body and every ego will die. If our medical model is not wrapped up in attachment to how long that period is, and instead focuses on what's vibrant, alive, and vital in the person right now, it has a far more promising starting point for creating wellness. Once we let go of our tragic stories, the ground of healing is open to us. We can thrive in the midst of chaos. Number 5. Discover what triggers your quantum field. Years ago, I was a frequent visitor to a spiritual community in the Catskill Mountains of New York. It embraced a rigid lifestyle, meditations in the chapel before breakfast, study and classes in the morning, work in the afternoon, and worship at night. There was another spiritual community close by, founded by Swami Muktananda. One day I visited there. The Swami was not in residence, but I talked to the chief administrator. "What techniques does the Swami advocate?" I asked as we swapped notes about how our two communities were structured. "Oh, he might tell a student that he is forbidden to meditate at all," he replied. I was aghast. Well, why would he say that? I wondered. Perhaps the student has been meditating for hours each day for many years, and has become detached from the material world. Another student who has never meditated, he might have them sitting in the lotus position day and night. The Swami was skilled at noticing people's habitual tendencies and giving his students the opportunity to express their divinity in ways that were unfamiliar to them. Each of us needs to find our own answer to the question, what activates the expression of my inner wisdom? The answer is absolutely unique for you, and you have to figure out what is best for your particular constellation of body, mind, and heart. It may look very different from the culture's vision, or even from your own beliefs. For instance, in the early 1990s, many of my friends belonged to gyms, and they sometimes tried to recruit me. But I lived 20 minutes' drive from the nearest gym. Driving there, dressing for exercise, working out, showering, and driving back, all collectively took about 2 hours. I just couldn't work that commitment into my day on a habitual basis. But what I could do was work out for 20 minutes a day at home. So I bought some home exercise equipment, a rebounder, a weight machine, an ab wheel, and some free weights, and used them regularly. Working out at a gym fit well for my friends. My routine worked for me. Now, once you set the intention of being healthy, you have to discover what it is that works for you. Later, I moved to a house 5 minutes from a gym. I joined and began going regularly, and sold my home exercise equipment. For me, 45 minutes of meditation each morning before I work out is essential. It's like a drug, or rather an antidote to the slothful, addictive, and intellectually lazy tendencies I have. It took me years to realize this and give myself that time in the mornings. I take a peculiar mix of supplements each day. They're the ones I notice work well with my physiology. I review the list and make changes every so often. My regimen might not work for you. Yours might not work for me. Understanding our bodies and listening to their signals is a vital part of wellness. What colors make you feel comfortable? What music soothes your heart? What images nourish your soul? What people do you have in your life that affirm the best in you? What events stimulate your creativity? setting up our lives so that our highest potentials are continually affirmed by our external environments, and so that our outer world provides epigenetic stimulation for our inner world, is an invitation to the multiverse to dance with us. Eve Bruce, MD, is a plastic surgeon who discovered indigenous healing during a trip to South America and was eventually initiated into the Yahak tribe as a shaman. She published a book about her experiences called Shaman MD. She beautifully articulates the call and response of the quantum universe. In our culture, we seem to have many answers. When asked why we had an accident or a disease, or in the face of global climate change, we give many answers. Faulty tools, faulty user, genetics, biochemical, and anatomic mishaps, pollution, the shrinking ozone layer. Yet these are answers to the question how, not why. Why questions lead to a message. What is the message? What is Spirit telling us through the language of our physical existence? How can we connect more fully to our physical existence and begin to hear God? The answers are within ourselves. We need only to ask. Open up to the answers and pay attention. Once you state your intentions, once you invite the universe into a conversation about your well-being, listen intently for the answers. Find the mix that's just right for you. Don't be too swayed by the latest fads, but tune in to the whispers of your soul and the storehouse of advice it contains. Number 6, allow for the X factor. I used to write an operations plan for a $10 million book publishing and distribution company each year. It was a famous exercise within the company involving every employee. The result was a 150-page operating manual that described the blueprint for the coming year. But I also had a section called the X Factor, with a couple of blank pages behind it. You never know what's going to come up, I told curious and skeptical inquirers, and while you can plan for every conceivable eventuality, there will always be occurrences that you did not foresee. Quantum healing is a lot like that. You state your intentions, you fuel them with passion, and then you wait upon the universe to see what X factors it throws your way. Energy moves in mysterious ways, and you cannot grasp the paths that it might take. Exceeding the limits of vision. Every human being is inclined, in the words of 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, to take the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. In 1899, Charles Duell, then U.S. Commissioner of Patents and Trademarks, urged the U.S. Congress to abolish his office with the conviction that everything can be invented, has been invented. Now, his position seemed reasonable at the time. After all, for transportation we had railroads that traversed continents and steamships that could cross the Atlantic in less than a week. For communication, we had telegraphs that could relay messages in Morse code around the world. Yet within a half a century of his prediction, a flood of inventions, the airplane, the automobile, the telephone, the computer, has made nonsense of his prediction. And today we are at a similar place in the history of healing. Modern technological medicine has given us great benefits, and the breakthroughs will accelerate. But it is dawning on us that the solutions we find outside of ourselves might indeed be dwarfed in magnitude by the solutions that come from within our own consciousness. For most of the last half of the 20th century, scientists assume that consciousness arose as the result of increasing complexity in our living systems. They believe that as living systems evolved from bacteria to simple animals to complex animals to mammals with large brains, that they gradually evolved this phenomenon called consciousness to cope with the increasing complexity of life. This unexamined assumption pervades the writings of scientists. Stephen Jay Gould, one of the fathers of modern evolutionary biology, wrote, "Humans arose rather as a fortuitous and contingent outcome of thousands of linked events, any one of which could have occurred differently and sent history into an alternate pathway that would not have led to consciousness." In the jargon of science, consciousness is regarded as an epiphenomenon of matter. Matter comes first and then consciousness. In this conviction, consciousness is something that arises out of the interaction of trillions of molecules within your body. This view was encapsulated by Sir Francis Crick, a co-discoverer of the double helix structure of the DNA molecule. In his 1994 book, The Astonishing Hypotheses, you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact nothing more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased, "You're nothing but a pack of neurons." Sir Francis's famous central dogma of molecular biology states that the code for life lies in the DNA, and that consciousness lies a long way down the biological chain, DNA to RNA to protein. His hypothesis certainly is astonishing, but for reasons other than the one Sir Francis imagined, for science has taken us by the shoulders, turned us around, and pointed us resolutely in the direction opposite of his hypotheses. Now we realize that consciousness underlies and organizes matter, and not the other way around. We have discovered that changes in consciousness precipitate changes in matter. We have realized that it is consciousness that is primary, and matter is secondary. Consciousness is epigenetic, triggering biological expression. Consciousness to DNA, to RNA, to protein. The changes in our bodies produced by consciousness reveal the most potent tool for healing that we have ever discovered. To a culture accustomed to looking for solutions out there, it seems inconceivable that the answers might lie within. Yet scientific research, the very method we use to study the world out there, now boomerangs back at us, pointing us to a much more challenging frontier. It reveals that the world out there is influenced by every shift we produce in here. The stack of research piles higher every year. It shouts to us that the tools of our own consciousness, faith, prayer, intention, optimism, belief, vision, charity, energy, hold promises of health, longevity, and peak performance that the interventions out there are hard-pressed to match. An ancient Sufi story tells of the angels convening at the dawn of time to discuss where to bury the meaning of life, a secret so sacred that only the most worthy of initiates should be allowed access to it. "We should put it at the bottom of the ocean," one exclaims. "No, the highest mountain peak," another argues. Eventually they turn to the wisest angel and ask where the most secret place might be. The angel replies, "There's one place no one will look. We will hide it in the human heart." Medicine, wellness, and healing look very different in a quantum world than they did in the mechanistic and reductionist world that preceded it. We see levels of casualty and epigenetic control that supersede the code in our DNA. The leading edge of scientific research opens up a new creative realm in which the intangible energy of our thoughts and emotions affects the tangible physical universe itself. Each new discovery is another indication of how important consciousness is for healing. We are learning to see ourselves and our bodies as malleable, influenced by every thought and feeling that flows through us. We can claim responsibility for the quality of thought and feeling that we host, selecting those that radiate benevolence, goodwill, love, and kindness. Doing this, we are doing more than conscious epigenetic engineering on our bodies. We are loving the whole world into health.